It's great to be here in Hyderabad. I live in and work in Mumbai, but Hyderabad remains my favorite city in India. And if it weren't for the money that one needs to make in order to survive, I would definitely be living here. Uh, so, okay. Also, my intellectual journey actually started right here in Hyderabad in a 1 BHK apartment in Begumpet. So I love just coming back to the city over and over again. Uh, First and foremost, I'd like to thank the organizers of Manthan Samvad for putting together such a big event and having speakers who have really sort of opened up our minds since the morning that all of us have been here. Also, I'd like to thank the audience for turning up in such a huge number. And I'll offer you 3 good reasons for the same. The first is obviously the fact that today is the last day of one long weekend, and it also happens to be the first day of another long weekend. So, secondly, and more importantly, today is a very important day in Hyderabad, given that Konidala Sivasankar Varaprasad's second movie in 12 years is releasing. So for those North Indians who still don't know their Telugu cinema, Mr. Prasad's better known by his stage name of Chiranjeevi. And also there is a test match on in Visakhapatnam. And Rohit Sharma has scored a century while opening the innings. So clearly there was a lot of competition for your time, and you guys still came, so thank you. Couple of disclaimers to start with. The first is, when I normally talk on economics and finance, I have a presentation which is full of numbers and charts, but today, given the the audience and the fact that this is such a big hall, I have not got a presentation. That does not mean that what I say will not be backed by numbers. Okay. The second thing that I wanted to say, is that I'll talk in simple English, unlike most economists do. So, and more importantly, I will also take the politics of the day into account while discussing economics. Now, the problem with economists is that they live in their own world, and while they talk on the economy, they don't talk about the politics of the day. There is no economics without politics. Okay, this is a very, very simple point which most economists don't seem to understand, or even if they understand, they tend to avoid. Okay. For those who follow me regularly on the social media, they would know that I go by the moniker of Shikshit Berozgar, which basically, in English means someone who's educated but unemployed. Now, this is a joke that I've been playing, or rather cracking on myself over the years, for the simple reason that I don't have a 9-to-5 job. So I'm not gainfully employed in the traditional and the strictest sense of the term, or as my parents would, love it. So the problem is, life sometimes turns a joke into reality. And I make a living writing columns across the media. And since, May, I think, April, May, my business model of, writing columns and making money has collapsed. And given that, I have a lot of time. And when you have a lot of time, the mind tends to wander, okay? And when my mind wanders, I end up having these long conversations with my alter ego. And this is, and I recently had a conversation with my alter ego, and this is how it went. Okay, so this is how my recent conversation with my alter ego went. Tell me something, Vivek. Why are you so free these days? Asked my alter ego. Because I have no work, dear, I replied. Oh, but why? Because there is an economic slowdown on. Media houses have cut down on their budgets, and they won't commission as many columns as they used to. Ha! Just because you don't have any work doesn't mean there is an economic slowdown, replied my alter ego. Well, there are so many economic indicators which suggest the same. Like what? Take car sales. They are down big time since the beginning of this year in comparison to the last year. Okay, but that's because millennials like to take Uber and Ola. Shared mobility is the name of the game these days. Okay, but motorcycle sales are also falling. So this means that there is some trouble in consumption in rural India. What to do? There are so many potholes everywhere. So people have decided to walk to places. Swasth Bharat, Mast Bharat. There, I have coined another slogan. Oh, but scooter sales are also falling. That's because millennials don't like the idea of owning things. Oh, but moped sales are also falling. Mopeds, do we still make them? Asked my alter ego, rather surprised. Yes, in 2018-19, we sold 880,000 mopeds. Okay? I know why moped sales are falling, my alter ego replied confidently. Every big city now has a metro. People are taking the metro everywhere. From Namma Metro to Amma Metro, we have it all. Now, this was driving me crazy. Here I was offering one fact after another, but my alter ego refused to listen to me. But I wouldn't give up. What about tractor sales? Why are they falling? Simple, the farmers are using more and more bullocks for farming. It gives the soil a natural feel. And there is a regular and free supply of manure as well. And what about commercial vehicle sales? Why are they falling, I asked. I mean, what is the need to move around stuff? The local economy should take care of everything, which is why state governments are now reserving jobs for locals. No need to go anywhere. But sales growth of vests, or what we call chaddi banyan in Hindi, have also slowed down. People are postponing the consumption of the simplest of things. Oh, that is simple. People want their sweat to be worth something. They want to feel it. Why let a piece of cloth absorb it? But biscuit sales are also not growing at the same pace as they used to. Isn't that very good? Asked my alter ego. Maida is slow poison and sugar is poison. What about FMCG companies? Why is their growth slowing down? I need to explain all these simple things to you. People are not using toothpaste and going back to the good old natural Datuvan, if you know what I mean. What about GST collections? They are at a 19-month low. GST, okay, let me think. What about non-oil, non-gold, non-silver imports? Now, non-oil, non-gold, non-silver imports are a very good indicator of consumer demand. And if they have been falling for a regular period of time as they have, it tells you that there is a problem with consumer demand in the country. Before my alter ego could answer that one, there was a knock on the door. I went up and opened it. My Amazon parcel had just arrived. It was my attempt to boost the consumer demand in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, the great tragedy currently is that we have managed to trivialize the entire debate on the economic slowdown around millennials not buying cars because they're using Uber and Ola. Even the finance minister of the country said so very, very confidently in a recent press conference. Those sympathetic to the government have gone further. We've been told that car sales have been falling because people just prefer a healthier lifestyle. Still others have said that the development of metro lines in cities has led to fewer people buying cars and vehicles of all kinds. Now, there are a number of points that need to be raised here. There has been a slowdown in consumption across the income spectrum. Are people not buying mopeds like they used to because they're using Uber and Ola? I mean, I hope the finance minister answers this question in one of her press conferences. I mean, for that to happen, the media has to first ask her the question, which doesn't happen these days. And what about tractors? Why are tractor sales going down? I mean, what has that got to do with Uber and Ola? Now, this is not to say that the popularity of Uber and Ola has not impacted car sales. Maybe it has. But is there any research or study that says so? Has the government commissioned any study using one of the many think tanks it has access to, or using the Indian Economic Service for that matter? Also, has anyone really asked the millennials as to why they are not buying cars, or why they prefer Uber and Ola, or why they prefer anything for that matter? Or are these reasons just being offered on the basis of WhatsApp forwards which are going around? I think it's precisely that. And there is a big hole in the Uber-Ola argument as well. Uber and Ola have been in India for around half a decade now. Why is it that people stopped buying cars only since the beginning of this year, and were happy to buy cars for the, up until December 2018? I mean, nobody's offered me an explanation for that. A similar logic can be offered against the metro argument. New Delhi has had a good metro connection for almost a decade now. And Delhiites buy cars, or buy many more cars than all the other big cities put together. But Delhi always has had a metro. It is only now, in the last 7-8 months, that they are not buying cars. So what is really happening here? Every government tries to control and project information in its favor. The current government is no different on this front. And this is only possible if the information is presented in a very simplistic sort of way. Allow me to explain. Why is there a slowdown in consumer demand? It is because millennials are not buying cars. This explanation is much simpler to sell than say something like incomes have risen at a slow pace, and hence people have not been spending money. Or the fact that they don't have much confidence in their economic future. Or the fact that they have overborrowed in the recent past and are now cutting down on their expenditure. Or the fact that India's so-called demographic dividend is collapsing. Or the fact that investment in the Indian economy is at a multi-year low. As Sanjay Chakravarti writes in The Truth About Us, all people, humans, Indians, everyone, everywhere, prefer simple information over complicated knowledge. The preference for simple information is individual, we all do it, and institutional. The government does it too. It is a permanent condition, end quote. The advent of social media, everything from Twitter and Facebook to WhatsApp, has made the phenomenon of simplification of information even more important. Before 24/7 TV first and the social media now came around, information reached people only the next day through newspapers or through an evening TV news bulletin. And then, later through morning TV news bulletins as well. I mean, I grew up in this city called Ranchi, and we used to get a dark edition of a newspaper where the news was not 1 day old, but 2 days old. So, yes, those were the days. And so with the social media, news is hitting us almost all the time. And given that, we need explanations to why something is happening all the time. The problem is that deep study of any topic requires time and effort. Most of us do not have the time, and effort is a very individual thing. I mean, we may want to make it, we may not want to make it. In this scenario, WhatsApp forwards and other such material, which offers solutions to complicated problems in a point-wise manner, have become very popular. As Chakravarti writes, start quote, without simplification and categorization, information is noise, it is useless. End quote. No one understands this better than the current government. It feeds on our national cognitive ease. So what is it that ails the Indian economy currently? Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, who we all had the pleasure of listening to in the morning, had said last month, and he said that today as well, that investment is the key driver of growth and consumption. And I agree with him 100% on this. The logic is straightforward. Investment creates jobs, jobs provide income to people, people spend this money, and this spurs consumption, and helps other people earn an income as well. These people also spend money and provide a further fillip to consumption, which leads to further investment, improvement in productivity, and so the cycle works. Which is basically, this one paragraph was basically what the Chief Economic Advisor's presentation said today. I mean, in case you guys did not understand, so okay. Now, let's take the example of Hyderabad, the city we are in currently. Now, I used to work in Hyderabad between 2002 and 2005, and the Hyderabad that I knew was very different from the Hyderabad that I see now. Okay? The city has changed massively in the last 2 decades. Now, how did that happen? That happened because companies came in here and invested a lot of money. IT offices were set up, call centers were set up, back offices were set up, and even a huge furniture store was set up. So obviously, this has led to people earning higher incomes, and this is, given a consumption, led to a consumption boom, and which is why, Hyderabad has probably the best restaurant scene in India. I mean, if you know what I mean. Back in 2002, there was only one Paradise restaurant in Secunderabad. In fact, the area itself was known as Paradise. I mean, it still is. Now there is a Paradise in almost every gully, as ironical as it may sound. And this leads me, along with a friend of mine, Mohit, to quip, वो जन्नत ही कैसी जो हर गली में नसीब हो. आगे सुनिए. वो जन्नत ही कैसी जो हर गली में नसीब हो, मैं तुझे खुदा भी कहूंगा, पहले रोटी तो नसीब हो. Now, back to the facts. As I said, numbers are important, even though I'm not showing any slides. Data from the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy suggests that the value of new projects announced fell to a 15-year low during the period April to June 2019. The investment to GDP ratio has been stagnant at 28-29% for the last 4 years, after reaching a high of 35.8% in 2007-2008. Given this slowdown in investing, and due to several other reasons, incomes haven't gone up at the same pace as they did in the past. If we look at the per capita income, between 2004 and 2014, it rose in double digits every year, in each of the years. Since then, it has risen in single digits, except in 2016-17, when it grew by 10.2%. If we look at rural wage rates for men, they rose massively between 2008-2009 and 2014-2015. The wages jumped by close to 28% just in 2013-14. Since then, they have grown in single digits, with the growth in 2018-19 falling to just 3.8%. When it comes to women, wages rose massively between 2008-2009 and 2014-15. They jumped by 25.3% in 2013-14. Since then, the growth has fallen in single digits, with wages rising by 6% in 2018-19. Now, this is the other side of low food inflation. The other big worry here is that there has been a massive fall in the female labor participation rate, which basically means that the proportion of women in the workforce has come down dramatically over the years. And at least up until now, I haven't come across a good explanation for why this has happened. So clearly there is a problem in income growth, both in rural and urban India. A massive increase in investments is the order of the day. I mean, as the chief economic advisor said, so we agree on the same. These investments will create jobs, which will absorb the huge number of youth, nearly 10 to 11 million, who have been entering the workforce every year. This is India's demographic dividend, which is collapsing. The evidence is all around us if we choose to see it. The best example of this is land-owning castes asking for reservations in jobs and education in the government. It's happened in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana as well. And the state governments wanting to reserve jobs for locals is happening in Andhra Pradesh. Karnataka has threatened to do it, so has Maharashtra. So this ultimately, if it goes on, it threatens the entire idea of India, which is not really a good thing. I mean, if you can't even move around in the country for a job, then what is the idea of having a country any which ways? Now the problem is, yes, I mean, we agree we need investment. The problem is corporates invest when they see a profitable future. Okay. Right now, with the consumer demand collapsing, corporates don't see that. I mean, in public, they'll say, we'll go invest in Kashmir, but that's a different thing altogether. Over and above this, on the whole, the Indian corporates are still nowhere near fully utilizing their existing capacities. So which basically means that the factories that they have can produce much more than they are currently producing. So in that scenario, there is no need to sort of invest and expand. Also, many corporates are struggling to repay debt. They are clearly not in a position to take on more debt, invest, and expand. So where does that leave us? Okay. While encouraging investment is important, what is more important in the short and the medium term is to get the consumer demand back on track. Demand which has been destroyed by slow growth in income, an extremely harebrained scheme called demonetization, and a horrible implementation of the Goods and Services Act. I mean, Goods and Services Tax. I mean, I pay GST, so I struggle with it almost every month. Now, unless there is an increase in consumer demand, most private corporates will not invest and expand. Hence, it would have made more sense for the government to cut personal income tax rates than corporate income tax as it has. Though the rumor going around in Delhi is that personal taxes may be cut around Diwali. Now, one logic offered in support of the cut in corporate taxes is, and I mean, if you guys read the business press, you would know about this, is that with lower tax rates in place, the companies will cut prices in order to attract consumers. Now, let's compare this option with the option of the government cutting personal income tax. In case of a personal income tax cut, the higher income lands up in the hands of an individual immediately. And then he can decide what he wants to do with it. I mean, he wants to save it, he can save it. He wants to spend it, he can spend it. In case of a corporate tax cut, the corporate may or may not cut the price of its goods or services. And hence, the consumer is dependent on the corporate's decision for his spending decision. So it's like, you're taking a wicket keeper and trying to get him to open the Indian batting in a test match. So, I mean, we've done that quite a lot in the past. So it's not an analogy that's only there in theory. So, once you take a look at the effective rates of tax that corporates pay after making use of exemptions and incentives, there isn't much scope to cut prices. The effective rate of tax for the Nifty 50 companies, which are the companies which have the biggest market capitalization in the country, is 26%. And the rate of tax being offered to them by the government is 25.2%. To the condition that they let go of all the exemptions and incentives that they've been using up until today while filing their taxes. So, I mean, even if a company wants to move to the new structure, it's not going to do that in a hurry. Now, sometime back, there was a lot of song and dance on the social media about Maruti cutting prices by rupees 5,000. I mean, why would anyone go buy a car which, the price is at least 4 to 5 lakhs because it's 5,000 rupees cheaper? I mean, it's beyond at least I don't get it. So, and this is after the company had already offered discounts and other goodies worth anywhere between rupees 40,000 and rupees 1.1 lakh on its various models, and not many people were buying. Now, so one of the ways, one of the things that we really need to do is rationalize and simplify our goods and services tax. It will go a long way in simplifying the lives of, small businessmen, and, it will also encourage consumption. Now, one of the things that people don't realize is that the goods and services tax also has a service tax in it, right? And the service tax system that we had earlier was inherently much simpler than the GST system that we have now. So this is a point that most people don't, seem to get. And every time you tell them that GST is complicated, they come back to you with the logic that the earlier system was even more complicated. But yes, but that was only for goods, not for services. Another suggestion that has been made multiple times is that the government should increase its overall expenditure. Now, corporates have been asking for an economic stimulus from the government. Now, this is a suggestion that gets made every time any economy is in trouble at any point of time. And it goes back originally to the British economist John Maynard Keynes. Keynes used the concept of the paradox of thrift to explain the economic conditions that prevailed in the aftermath of the Great Depression of 1929. The word thrift basically refers to the careful use of money and not being wasteful in spending it. After the stock prices as well as the commodity prices fell in 1929, the population at large in the US and in large parts of Europe started to cut back on its spending. If a single person cuts back on his expenditure, it makes sense. But if a significant section of the population cuts back on its spending, there is a problem. The logic is very simple. One man's spending is another man's income. And this is something that is playing out in India right now. With the people and businesses not spending money, Keynes suggested that the government needed to act as the spender of the last resort. The only way out of this situation was for the government to spend more on public works and other programs. Keynes even rhetorically suggested that if the government had run out of options to spend money, it should basically get people to dig holes and pay them for it. I mean, we did that through Nariga, so. This would create employment. Also, once the people digging holes get paid by the government, they would spend that money and help the overall economy grow. Now, how does this apply in the Indian context? The overall government expenditure in the years 2017-18 and 18-19 went up by 15% and 9.3% respectively, adjusted for inflation. This when the overall economy grew by 7.2% and 6.8% respectively. Now, even in the, if you look at the most recent quarter, April to June, the overall economy grew by 5%, the consumption expenditure, private consumption expenditure grew by 3.1%, and the government expenditure grew by 8.9%. So over the last couple of years, it's the jump in government expenditure which has kept the growth going. Now, the evidence for the same can be found in the actual fiscal deficit of the government, not the one that gets bandied around. Now, the actual fiscal deficit of the government can, or what economists also like to call the public sector borrowing requirement, can be obtained by adding the reported fiscal deficit of the central government, the off-budget borrowing, I mean the kind that happens through FCI and all that, the fiscal deficit of the state governments and the borrowing carried out by the public sector, which if you look at estimates made by various economists from Sajid Chinoy to Shankar Acharya, is at around 9% of the GDP. So that is more or less the actual fiscal deficit of the Indian government. So obviously the government is spending money. Now, what happens if it spends more money? If it wants to spend more money, it needs to earn higher taxes. But right now, that is not a possibility. Hence, it will end up borrowing more money. Now, when the government borrows more money, and in an environment where our household financial savings are falling, it leaves lesser money for the private sector to borrow, or what economists like to call crowding out. Now, this crowding out essentially leads to a situation where the private guys who want money need to offer a higher rate of interest. So the interest rates in the economy go up. So there's a problem there as well. Now, one way out of this for the government, and this is a very radical suggestion which someone on Twitter gave me, is that the government should sell public sector enterprises very, very rapidly and their land and pump that money into the National Investment Fund and use that money to rapidly expand public infrastructure. But that again is a pipe dream because selling public sector enterprises would mean disturbing the status quo. And history tells us that governments in India generally avoid doing that. Now, I don't know how many of you know that the government of India also makes condoms. Did you guys know that? So that is your value add for the day. So basically, this is where the Indian growth conundrum is stuck, and untangling it won't be easy. I mean, it's not just about simpler labor laws, so, as we heard in the morning today. So, now, as I said at the beginning of this talk, I have a lot of time these days, and given that I have a lot of time, I find my mind drifting, and very recently my mind drifted back to this film poster that I had seen in the late 1980s. I'm not as old as I look. This film poster basically, it was largely in black and had a hero and a heroine, I mean, like all Hindi film posters have. And the hero's face was hidden, okay? And the movie had a tagline as well. The tagline was, "Love the crime of the century." So any guesses? Nobody used to watch cinema in the 80s or what? Okay. So the movie was Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak. Yeah, which basically made Amir Khan and Juhi Chawla the stars that they eventually became. Now, Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak in public memory got shortened to QSQT, okay? And that's how we sort of remember the movie. Now, I mean, if you guys are wondering as to why am I suddenly talking about QSQT in a talk on the economic slowdown, allow me to explain. Our current finance minister, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, will be remembered for her PSPT Act. Now, PSPT is inspired from QSQT and essentially stands for Press Conference Se Press Conference Tak. I mean, she could possibly call her autobiography that as well. So, okay. Now, Ms. Sitharaman has been doing a series of press conferences to announce measures in order to revive the Indian economy. In a press conference on September 20th last month, the finance minister announced a major cut in corporate income tax rates. The idea is to align the corporate tax rate with other countries in Southeast Asia and thereby provide a boost to Make in India initiative of the government. Okay? There are multiple questions that pop up here. Lower corporate income tax rates could easily have been announced when the budget was presented on July 5th, just 2.5 months earlier. If the corporate income tax cuts were a part of a broader economic philosophy to revive the economy, why weren't they presented at the time of the budget? This is a question well worth asking. But then, these days we don't ask questions, so. More importantly, why is the government going about announcing its initiatives to revive the economy in such a piecemeal manner, press conference by press conference? Other than cutting the corporate income tax rate, the government has also introduced a low rate of income tax of 17% for new firms in the manufacturing sector. The conventional wisdom is that this will encourage corporates, both Indian and foreign, to set up new manufacturing businesses in India and will encourage Make in India. I mean, at least that's what corporates say publicly these days when they go on CNBC. Nevertheless, a low rate of income tax is just one of the things that foreign companies look at while deciding whether to set up a manufacturing unit in a country or not. Okay? The government needs to follow up the low tax rate announcement with factor reforms, and as cliched as it may sound, in the areas of land and labor. Over and above this, the Indian ports play a crucial role in trade. They handle around 95% of the goods trade by volume. But the turnaround time of most of these ports, if you leave out a few private ports, continues to remain high. And this needs to improve. And the improvement has to, the government has to say something about this because the government owns these ports. Now the question is the government really interested in the economy, or is it just interested in headline management? If all the economic initiatives are announced at one go, or maybe 2 press conferences, not 6 or 7 as have already happened, then they will dominate the press only for 1 or 2 days. But if these initiatives are broken up and announced press conference by press conference, the government can dominate the headlines for many days, and which is what it wants. Now, this is, I think, the core point of what I wanted to talk about today. In politics, it is very important to be seen to be doing something in order to address a problem. When it comes to economic problems, most citizens do not understand the details. What they are interested in is in seeing whether the government is doing something. Once we take this into account, then the government announcing the economic initiatives in a piecemeal manner starts to make sense. With multiple announcements, the government dominates the media over multiple days, and in the process, the citizens get the feeling that the government is doing something over and over again. Okay? While it makes political sense to spread out the announcements, it doesn't make much sense if the idea is to revive the economy. This is because companies do not just invest because of lower taxes. What was needed, given that whatever little has come in the 6th year of this government, was an overarching framework to transform the Indian economy. As Debashish Basu, who's one of my favorite columnists, wrote in a recent column in the Business Standard, start quote, if the recent cuts followed from a well-articulated overarching framework, it would have been transformative. There is no such framework. For the engine of incentives competition to fire, we need ease of entry and exit for all businesses. We don't have it. Dozens of permissions, some mindless, are required to start a business. Running it involves large frictional costs, including bribes and extortion. And shutting it down is equally tough. Land acquisition remains a big thorny issue. I mean, how do you carry out business without land acquisition? The governance, regulatory, and justice system is no better. The continuous failure of the central bank to supervise banks and finance companies, I mean, I don't agree with it totally, but this is what he said. The bumbling of sectoral regulators across infrastructure and the extortive attitude of revenue authorities, I mean, tax terrorism, are inimical to a market economy, leading to enormous waste of time and resources. The government is the largest litigant. Now, if you guys remember, we were shown a huge slide, a couple of slides in the morning, where we were told that the judges are not doing their jobs properly. What the gentleman forgot to mention is the fact that the judges don't go and file the cases, right? So the government is the largest litigant. Hidden from the public eye are ills of tendering system of government projects, which leads to terrible productivity and enormous corruption, end quote. So cutting the corporate tax rate is just a very small part of the whole that is required. Now, let's discuss a few solutions quickly. And I mean, you'll realize why these solutions are not solutions after I have discussed the solutions. So, India has huge unskilled labor, okay? Or as Dr. Arvind Subramanian said in one of his economic surveys, we have a natural comparative advantage when it comes to labor. Also, there is disguised unemployment in agriculture, which basically means that there are many more people working in agriculture than is economically feasible. What can be done for them? I mean, and this is a serious question. Now, one of the thoughts that I have discussed in my writing over the years is that the real estate sector can really come to the rescue of these people, and that's because the real estate sector has the capacity to create many low-end, low-skilled and semi-skilled jobs. The problem is currently the trust between the builders and the prospective buyers has broken down completely. And most people won't buy an under-construction property. Hence, the business model of real estate as we knew it has broken down, and I don't see getting it set anytime soon. Now, one thing that can be done to encourage real estate purchase is to bring down the stamp duty on registration of properties. Then, as Dr. Raghavan and me were discussing yesterday, there is the case of change in land usage laws. I mean, that is one reform which is really required, but which is where the state level, the government as well as the state level politicians make the maximum amount of money. So that's not going to happen. Then we have exports. Now, if we look at the economic history of the world, most countries went from being developing countries to becoming developed countries through the export route, particularly through what we call the merchandise export routes. The merchandise export to GDP ratio of India peaked at 16.8% of the GDP in 2011-12. In 2018-19, it was at 12.1%. Do you guys remember who was one of the commerce ministers through these years? Okay, so she now is our finance minister. So instead of going up, our exports have been falling, particularly low-end, high labor-intensive kind of exports, which can create employment. Now, I would like to quote something that Mr. T.N. Nayanan, a very well-respected economic commentator and who started the newspaper Business Standard, writes in his latest column with regard to garment exporting. Okay? Start quote. Vietnam, Indonesia, and Cambodia have recorded rapid export growth, and Bangladesh has continued to pull ahead of India. The reason is that they have stepped into China's shoes. Beijing used to export $20 billion worth of garments every month. That is down to $12 billion, a figure that India takes nearly 9 months to achieve. The slack has been taken up mostly by East Asia and Bangladesh, and to a relatively minor degree by India. Bangladesh used to export only 60% of what India did. Now it exports twice as much. Vietnam has overtaken India and is now comfortably ahead. The irony is that Bangladesh sources cotton, yarn, and fabrics from India. Stop quote, end quote. Now, these are some of the things that we need to do, but they come with this huge disclaimer that I want to make. Now, I spent much of the year 2016 writing this book called India's Big Government, The Intrusive State and How It's Hurting Us. The first draft of the book was around 250,000 words. And I mean, I cut it to around 180,000 words, so it was still a very thick, big book. I mean, one of my friends even said that it's like a hathi ka bachcha, you know, so, and it can be used as a good door stopper. So imagine, you know, working for a year and then hearing this, how insensitive people can be. Okay. Now, so, you know, while the book did not do well, not many people read it, but I was very happy with it because I had this one big realization after writing the book. And it was a very simple realization, but sometimes the simplest of things are the most difficult to understand. And it went something like this. So while writing the book, I ended up reading many reports written by many government committees and many government departments. And during the process of reading these reports, I realized that all these committees and all these reports have solutions to almost all of India's economic and social problems. It's just that, you know, these reports never really get implemented in the strictest sense of the term. So let me give you an example. So there is a division called Commission for Agriculture Costs and Prices, which works under the Ministry of Agriculture. They bring out a lot of very good reports with detailed data and solutions on Indian agriculture. I don't think anyone reads them other than those people who write it and then people like me who need to make a living out of research that other people do. So now, so what I'm trying to say is that, you know, when I write pieces and when I share them on the social media, people come back to me and say, "Arey, ye sab theek hai, problem mat batao, solution batao." Okay? And then what they'll do is they'll tag, Nirmala Sitharaman these days. Earlier they used to tag Arun Jaitley, who's no longer with us. So it's not, so the point I'm trying to make here is it's not that the government does not know the solutions. It knows every solution to every problem that we have. It chooses not to implement them. It overlooks them. Now, this is a point that, we need to realize. What I'm basically trying to say is that the politicians are the biggest structural factor holding India back. By this, I don't just mean the politicians who are in power currently, okay? It's very important to say that these days, so. No, but I really mean it. I mean, I'll explain. No, I'm not even trying to remotely suggest that if the Congress party was in power, our economic scenario would have been better, okay? So, now look at what they did post-2009 after Pranab Mukherjee became the finance minister. And a lot of the mess that happened back then, we are still dealing with. Now, of course, Mr. Mukherjee did very well for himself. He became the president, and he was later even given the Bharat Ratna. So, to conclude, I would like to repeat something that I keep writing in my columns. The first step towards solving a problem is acknowledging that it exists. Okay. The current dispensation doesn't believe there is a problem, which is why all is well, sab changa hai, shob bhalo ache. This reminds me of a poem by a Bhojpuri poet called Gorakh Pandey. I mean, if you guys haven't heard of Gorakh Pandey, have you guys heard of this band called Indian Ocean? So Indian Ocean has this hit song called Hille Le Jhatjhor Duniya. So that was originally written by Gorakh Pandey. So, I mean, it was written by Gorakh Pandey. What does it, I mean, originally written doesn't mean anything. So, okay. So this is how the poem goes. And I mean, I'll read it out in Hindi. And if people don't understand, you can just say so, I'll translate it in English as well. राजा बोला रात है, रानी बोली रात है. राजा बोला रात है, रानी बोली रात है. मंत्री बोला रात है, संतरी बोला रात है. राजा बोला रात है, रानी बोली रात है, मंत्री बोला रात है, संतरी बोला रात है. ये सुबह सुबह की बात है. Should I translate it or? So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's all I had. And if we have time, I'll be happy to take questions.
Yeah, I wanted to ask one question. Is there any single, whatever the government implemented, which is populist as well as which makes economic sense?
Arre baap, that's a PhD topic. So, populist and economic sense.
Yeah, which made an economic sense.
I think let's meet after the thing and then discuss, because I can't give a short answer for this. So,
Sir, I am Abhigyan from Hyderabad Central University. Our chief economist advisor was saying that technology do not take away the jobs, although it adds to it. He was also saying that our economy grew at 7 to 8% in the last 5 years. Then I want to ask that, what is the reason behind the jobless growth? And one thing I want to add that, what we will do with that 5 trillion economy? Because except that with that 5 trillion economy, we can only feature on the list which shows that India has
I got what you're saying.
Your question.
India has become second largest economy. When World Happiness Index comes, we are at 138.
I got your question. I'll answer it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So, to answer your first question about jobless growth, I mean, so there was this piece of research which was carried out some time back, and it looked at the annual survey of industries data for the last 35 years. And what was found was that when companies want to expand, they invest capital instead of hiring labor. So, which basically means is that companies like to install new machines when they want to expand, and they don't like hiring new people. And that can be the reasons can vary from everything from our labor laws to, the lack of ease of doing business and so on. Now, to answer your second question, I will twist it a little and say something that I want to say and try answering your question. Now, one of the things that I find very, very stupid is this, latest fascination that we've become bigger than this country, we've become bigger than that country. Now, recently we became bigger than France, and then France became bigger than us again. Now, and there was a discussion happening on that. Now, it's not like India suddenly started becoming bigger than these European countries now. We became bigger than Italy, we became bigger than Spain, we became bigger than South Korea. I mean, no song and dance was made about these things. Now, as far as France is concerned, France has a population of 5%, that of India, which basically means that their per capita income is 20 times that of us. So the metric to look at is not 5 trillion, 8 trillion, 2 trillion, but the metric to look at is per capita income. Is that really going up? So, which we don't these days. So, yes, ma'am.
I want to ask, what is this thing about increasing consumerism all the time, when a lot of us, our concerns are also about growing sustainably, and we actually are consuming too much. At least a whole lot of us are consuming too much when we need to slow down. And on the other hand, there are a whole lot of have-nots who don't have enough money to buy the basic necessities. So is there something where we can grow in a sustainable manner and still call it economic growth?
That is for a philosopher to answer. I'm just a journalist, so. I mean, I don't have a straightforward answer for your question. I'm sorry.
Thank you.